To tonight's Norwich Socialist Workers meeting. The title, Resistance and Revolution, the Real Tradition of International Women's Day. Such an important topic at this time, of course, celebrating International Women's Day, which is on the 8th of March. We've got two fantastic speakers this evening. I'm really delighted to introduce them both. First, we're going to hear from Marta, Pych, a Polish abortion rights campaigner, and then we're going to hear from Camilla, Royle, a socialist author who, amongst many other things, penned Rebel's Guide to Engels. So we're going to hear from Marta first, then Camilla, then there'll be time for some questions and discussion, and I can bring the speakers back in. My name's Julie. I'm a lifelong socialist and member of Norwich SWP, and I'll be chairing this meeting. So Marta, Pych, we're going to hear from you first. Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Marta. I'm from Pracownicza Demokracja, which means Workers' Democracy Organization. And my speech will be a short update on our fight for women's rights. As you may know, on October 2020, the Constitutional Tribunal declared abortion in cases, even if fetus is not viable, illegal. So that means like inhuman and degrading treatment for many women. And it was the main trigger to start our street struggle and our demonstrations. As you may have seen, they were tremendous. The video of demonstrations, like where 10,000 of people took part in, that was truly amazing. And to my great disappointment, in February, our movement was not really as active as back then, but definitely there are many things to be happy with, and I think it is this time of power realization and the time where class consciousness arises among Polish women, because, and I see our role as socialists as telling people that all we're gonna have because of this protest is because of our struggle and street struggles and demonstrations. Because updating on what's happening now in Poland, the biggest opposition party, Civic Platform, changed their program, their agenda, in this manner that they decided if they gain power, they're gonna follow the German model on abortion law. So the abortion will be legal to up to 14 weeks of pregnancy. But firstly, women have to see psychologists, some specialists, and then women are free to decide. Like, it is still some compromise, but it is indeed a huge improvement. It would be if it ever happened. But it is important to say people that it is not because Civic Platform is so nice and cute for us, etc., but it is because of their struggle and their power. And even like routine neoliberals who only cares about their power and their capital, even they see us as the considerable power and see our movement as something they should take into consideration when deciding on their program. So that's indeed somehow of some kind of victory for our movement. And not only the opposition see our power, but also and potential of our movement, but also the ruling party. There are recordings of leader of Law and Justice Party, Jarosław Kaczyński, saying that he could never expect such an impact of the movement, and that he could never even expect that we're gonna mobilize so much, and that he considers this ruling of the tribunal as the mistake, as his biggest political mistake in his whole career. So that shows how they are afraid of us, of our power. Also, actions of the police clearly shows the very chaotic actions shows their fear of women who are gaining the consciousness about their rights and about the unity among them, because it is also very, very important during these protests. Women from different backgrounds, like not only women, because they were allied by men as well, but people from very different backgrounds were fighting together, were united, and I think many of people noticed that those like very illusionary differences, like living in city or living in on the countryside, or like working as a shop assistant, or like working in a company, it's like actually not such a difference, because our interests are the same and common in opposition to the interests of government and companies. Like I think also the COVID crisis really showed us that the government and like the biggest companies have actually totally opposing interests to us as people. So I think many of Polish citizens really start to see this. And it happened, of course, through these demonstrations. It happened through the street struggle and this feeling of solidarity and this amazing feeling of being united. And it is something that can happen only onto the streets. So that's amazing. Although we have some problems with the leadership of the movement, because as in the beginning it was clearly the grassroots movement. Now the activists who took leadership, they are more neoliberals than we'd like to, because they like taking photos with Donald Tusk, and they like really want to be supported by neoliberals and supporting them and their interests. But even though at this point we have like very few demonstrations, and it is like not as it used to be on November or December, there are definitely some like important things happening now, and things that we should be very happy about, like little victories. Especially I see much hope in new generation, in young people. On the previous meeting, I've said that young people, like 40% of them actively took part in demonstrations for women's rights. And now I see like polls shows that 30% of young people support left. So it changed so drastically, because a year ago it was like only 15%.
You've got two minutes left, Marta.
Okay. So indeed, it is something to be happy about, because even if they see left as maybe neoliberals supporting LGBT plus rights or women's rights, like fundamental reproductive human rights, it doesn't really matter, because even declaring themselves as left may one day lead them to reading Marxism theory and like realizing their class position and and yeah, gaining class consciousness. So that's something really positive. And another thing I would like to also tell, that reproductive rights are not only the rights to abortion and to like proper sex education. It is also about having a flat. It seems not really much a reproductive right, but in Poland we have so much problem with the prices of rent and prices of flats, that there's no possibility to family planning and to have like good and happy family life, because we have nowhere to start our family lives. And that's also another problem, and more young people see it and see that the main cause of this problem is the capitalism. Yes, so there are some concerns, some struggles, but generally there is much hope. And it is not revolution at this point, but it is the very important time before the revolution, where we gonna realize of rent of apartments. So like because I'm answering the question. The question was, sorry, the price of what? The prices of rent, like how much you have to pay landlord. Yeah, basically. So it is something very much positive that Polish society starts see also socialism like approach us as our organization with curiosity, reading our newspapers, and that's much of improvement in Poland. So hopefully we one day gonna have it. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Marta. Everyone's clapping. Thank you. Now we're going to hear from Camilla. Thank you, Camilla. I need someone to unmute, Camilla, or can you unmute?
Great. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Marta. So this talk is because it's International Women's Day on the 8th of March in just a few days. International Women's Day was actually founded as International Working Women's Day. It was started by socialists in 1910, among them someone called Clara Zetkin, a very important revolutionary socialist. And they chose the 8th of March to commemorate the day when garment workers, what we call the shirtwaist workers, organised a demonstration through New York City. Yeah, some of the most oppressed, some of the poorest workers in the city, mostly women workers, organised and demonstrated for the vote for women and for trade union rights and for better conditions for themselves. International Women's Day has often throughout history been the occasion of mass marches and protests, whether it's the suffragettes here in Britain, or of course the women who marched in St. Petersburg in 1917 actually kicked off some of the events that led to the Russian Revolution of 1917. And there's some great examples throughout history of inspiring struggles led by women for equality, sometimes kind of hidden from mainstream history, really, aren't they? Last year, in a much smaller way, I was also on strike as part of my union, and we celebrated International Women's Day on the picket line just before, obviously, the start of lockdown. So, I mean, this is 100 years ago. The situation for women has changed a lot over the past 100 years, hasn't it? So just as one example, in 1906, the medical advisor to the Board of Education, who was actually a woman herself, interestingly enough, said that girls shouldn't be pushed too hard when it comes to doing subjects in school like mathematics. It's more appropriate for girls to be doing things like cookery and embroidery and handicrafts and those kind of things. Attitudes like this are no longer commonplace in our society. We live in a very different kind of world, and women's lives have changed dramatically. We can go to work, we can vote, of course, and run businesses, even become world leaders. Many things about our lives have changed, and I think Marta's absolutely right that all of these gains that women have made have been won by ordinary women and men as men through struggle. But I mean, we're still a very long way from real liberation, and of course many of the gains we've made can also be rolled back. For one thing, the pandemic itself has it's exposed many of the inequalities that exist within society, hasn't it? The racism, the oppression of disabled people and older people, but it's also exposed and told us something about the role of women in society. We discovered that it's actually women doing a lot of the work that keeps society going. Think about care work. Vast majority of care workers would be women. The NHS, 70% female workforce. People stacking supermarket shelves and making sure people get fed. Many of them women as well. The groups in society that are often underpaid and underappreciated. We started to actually appreciate the work they were doing a lot more. Women have also been expected during the pandemic and the lockdown to take on a lot of the responsibility for doing all the work within the home. I will show, people might have seen this kind of terrible advert that the government here put out, stay home, save lives, with this idea that what women are doing within the home is looking after the kids, teaching the kids and doing the housework. There was uproar about this, and they had to withdraw it, but nevertheless that kind of got through. So women are doing a huge amount of the unpaid work within society in the home. Parents have also been expected to take on a huge burden of the homeschooling of children, and I think the teachers union is right to call for the closure of schools because it's not safe for kids to be in schools, but it's just been accepted that parents are going to just absorb all this extra work that it takes to not only look after kids but also try to educate them and help them with their lessons and things, and that the majority of that work has fallen on the shoulders of women in the main. The pandemic has also exposed the kind of levels of domestic violence as well. So Refuge charity reported a 65% spike in calls to its helpline in the first week of the lockdown, the first lockdown last year. So it kind of shows how the family can often be a place where you feel safe, especially right now. It can be a place where you feel loved and supported often, but for many people the family sadly is not a safe place for people. It can also be a place where people face stress and can even face violence. Many indicators of how we haven't won full liberation for women. There's still the gender pay gap. There's still the fact that if you look at representation in society, still only a third of MPs are women. There's one statistic in Judith Orr's book on Marxism and women's liberation, which I would recommend, where she says that actually there are more men named John that running the top 100 companies in Britain than there are women running those companies. We're disproportionately affected by austerity, things like the public sector pay freeze, things like the way that universal credit is paid, things like obviously maternity related benefits and the Sure Start centres that they cut. Many of these things affect women. And we've seen with things like the Me Too movement and Weinstein over the past few years how prevalent sexist ideas still are in society. I think the far right is a threat to women. We've talked about the Law and Justice Party in Poland, but we've got the likes of Trump and Bolsonaro and Orban in Hungary, and all those people, many of them have very sexist policies and ideas. Trump is gone now, thankfully, but Trumpism and the kind of far right politics that he represented still exist in society. There are lots of ideas about where women's oppression comes from, why we're still in this situation. And there's many wrong ideas in society, I would say. You know, there's still the idea that it's somehow to do with biology, that women's brains are maybe different, that we're just naturally more gentle and caring. We don't get paid the same amount because we don't go for the top jobs, because we're not supposed to be confident in the same way that men are. There are people who argue that if you grow up female, or if you grow up male, then you're just socialized into that particular role in society, and it will be impossible to change things and impossible to break out of the way society socializes you. The idea that religion is to blame still comes up, especially with regards to Muslims. People will say that, you know, it's the ideas of religion, and they'll point to particularly Islam and say that's a threat to women. I don't agree with this at all, of course. And you know, there are people who say that it's something to do with men, that it's the ideas that men have in their heads, or it's men all working together to keep men down because, you know, they supposedly benefit from women's oppression. Also don't agree with that. I think what we have to kind of argue, and what I would argue as a socialist, is that women's oppression comes about due to the type of society in which we live. You know, it hasn't always been the case that that women have been paid less, or that women have been expected to do the majority of the work within the home. People have lived in very different types of society throughout human history. Yeah, for most of human history, actually, we lived in much more equal societies where men and women shared out their roles in a much more egalitarian way, including making decisions about people lived in small tribes about where they were going to move to and what the tribe was going to do next. Women played a much more prominent role and were much more respected. What happened was that you got the beginnings of a class society from about 10,000 years ago. Rather than being nomadic hunter-gatherers, people started to settle down and started to practice agriculture. You got the beginnings of a situation where there's societies divided by class. So there are some people who managed to, because there was agriculture, they could build up a surplus, they could start to own goods. Because they're settled, they could start to own property, permanent shelters. And for men, it became more and more important to know, not just how much property they owned, but who they were going to pass that property down to. And they needed to know whose children were theirs. So you didn't have you can have kind of promiscuity where people don't know whose children belong to which men anymore. You started to get the beginnings of what later became a nuclear family, with permanent shelters and agriculture. And women couldn't play the same role in producing food as they could previously. They couldn't necessarily use the heavy agriculture. Birth rates, I think, went up as well, and women started playing more of a role in the home, looking after children. I mean, this is 10,000 years ago. This is not, things have changed a lot over the past 10,000 years, obviously dramatically. But I think this kind of laid the basis for what we have today. Friedrich Engels called it the world historic defeat of the female sex once you got this shift in society towards class society. Much more recently, you started to get the development of the modern nuclear family, and that nuclear family still plays a huge role within capitalism. It does a lot of the free labour that capitalists won't pay for. So there's all these statistics, like if you paid a working mother for all the cooking and cleaning and childcare they do, then they should earn £70,000 per year from doing all that. That's work that women are doing for free, mostly women, that is not being paid for by the state. All these kind of ideas about women's place being in the home, women being gentler, women being more caring, women being more interested in how they look, all those kind of things kind of stem from these material changes in society. What I will end on in 3 minutes is that, once we've established that it's class that kind of drives oppression, then what about the resistance? And I think there are many examples around the world of women being actually leading at the forefront of resistance. I mean, including Poland, but if you look at Black Lives Matter, women were at the centre of it, Black women. You look at the movement of teachers to shut down schools, women played a huge role in that. Climate movement led by a young woman, Greta Thunberg, of course, again, involves many women, many young women. So all of these are kind of showing us that actually when you see struggles, including struggles for women's liberation, women are not just waiting for liberation to be handed to them by people at the top of society. Women are, involved in all these struggles. I think women's ideas also, and people's ideas in general, also change most dramatically when you have revolutionary situations. Look at the Russian Revolution, started by women, as I said, involved women, and changed society so dramatically that women went from a situation where women were brutally oppressed, where there were hugely sexist ideas around women in society, to one where they'd actually, Lenin said that they'd actually done more to liberate women than in many of the supposedly enlightened countries of the West. Actually, they legalized abortion in 1920. They set up things like the Zenotdel, which toured around the country educating women. Because many of these real concrete changes, material changes for women were rolled back with the counter-revolution and with Stalin, when it went back to the idea that you needed to keep women in the home and keep women reproducing the next generation to defend the state. The advances around women's rights and also gay rights, which were rolled back, sadly, during the Stalinist counter-revolution. Look at Egypt as well. I mean, 10 years ago in 2011, we saw the Arab Spring. Women were at the heart of that as well, organising and occupying Tahrir Square. And they were involved, they were breaking up stones in the pavement to throw at the police and the authorities to defend the square, not the kind of usual image of submissive Muslim women that were kind of fed by the media at all. They were central to the labour strikes, even leading up to the revolution and to the protests around it. It showed that you could actually overthrow a dictator, but how it also showed that you could actually change ideas around women and change all kinds of ideas in society by doing that. So I'm coming to the end of my time, but I think we could put a vision of what kind of change could look like, and also a vision about how things could be different, like how we could have a more democratic society, more equal society, where things like childcare and running society would not just be placed onto women, but would actually be part of everyone's role and part of what we all do to organise society. So yeah, I'll end on that.
Thank you very much, Camilla. Thank you. Thanks to you.
I think they a little bit relate to each other, because yes, I think the only way we can actually win something more than relying on liberals, and yeah, because regarding the second question, the wing of conservatives, even in this liberal party, is very strong, and this compromise is clearly this this new program is clearly not because of the political views of the member of this liberal party, which is not really liberal so much, but we have really changed perspective in Poland. But it is only because of our demands. So, but I think the only way for us to win and to overthrow the government and change the political area in Poland is by uniting with other fields, like LGBT plus rights fighters, environment movements, and especially teachers and nurses, because they're receiving only these clapping actions, clapping for our heroes, but they have no improvement in their salaries or in conditions of their work, which is extremely dangerous in these times. So also minors are very much affected because we have to withdraw from using coal, but there is no governmental idea how to do it, and they are like living they're left behind. So there are lots of potential in our society, but the problem is, and yes, it if this movement will ever unite, it will be the leadership will be like women, yes, because they were the first that started any struggle and demonstrations against the government on the mass mass demonstrations, yes. But on the other hand, it is difficult because I think we are very much afraid of COVID, and our mindset of people here is like to survive, yes, to survive this time, and to even among women rights movement, it is this, like, we have less demonstrations now because we are afraid of COVID. So it all depends on number of cases, because we don't want to put in danger lives of our activists. On the other hand, like, we see the importance and of like being united in one movement and fighting again onto the streets. So this is kind of dilemma.
Thank you, Marta. And Camilla?
Yeah, thanks, Keith. Excellent, very important question. So do all women have a shared common experience? No, they don't. I think, I think it does matter that we see representation of women in society. That we see women on TV when you look at the journalists or look at the politicians or whatever. And I would also argue that all women face sexism. So I don't think, much as I hate someone like Priti Patel, I don't think we should, as socialists, say sexist things about her or racist things, for that matter. I don't think that helps anyone. But I don't think it's true that everyone has the same common experience. You look at the pandemic, the experience of a kind of CEO of a company working in her home with her paid for childcare and getting her organic food delivered to her is very different from that of a care worker having to go into work, or a bus driver, or another frontline worker, or someone trying to live in a cramped overcrowded home. So class plays a real big role in oppression, and plays a role in how women's oppression is experienced. Abortion has always been kind of divided by class. Before it was legal in Britain, there were options for wealthy women to access abortion that weren't available for everyone. And also what's more, it's not enough to see female politicians. If you look at Kamala Harris, the first female vice president of the United States, is that going to help bring about women's liberation? If women's oppression is rooted in class society, that I've tried to kind of argue, it's not going to fix the problem, because she and Biden are part of the same capitalist system that oppresses everyone. There's a lot that we could say about trans liberation, because I think this is a slightly different argument.
Oh, you've just frozen there, Camilla. Sorry, you just froze for a moment. Sorry, just go back and go for it.
I think J.K. Rowling's completely wrong to suggest that that transgender women don't have the same experiences as cisgender women. I guess that's what she's arguing. So they're trying to argue that women's oppression is all about biology, really. That if you don't have some of the same kind of biological experiences, or if you haven't given birth, or had periods and that kind of thing when you were young, then then you don't experience women's oppression. I think it's ridiculous. And also, you know, kind of avoids the issue that there are many different experiences that cisgender women have. You know, we haven't all had children, for example. So, and I think that, you know, it's a bizarre argument for, yeah, because feminists used to always argue that we shouldn't be limited by biology, and now they're sort of saying that it's all about biology. And I think also that, you know, we should start from the kind of position that transgender women, you know, I think trans women are women, and I think they're also some of the most oppressed people in society. Trans women face many of the same kinds of oppression that all other women face. They're much more likely to be to experience domestic violence than you know, than anyone. So yeah, I think we should be for liberation for all women, and we should say that transgender women are women, and that people should be able to express their gender identity however they choose. You know, their existence shouldn't be up for debate. Yeah, there's probably more we could say about that, but not on that.
Thanks, Marta and Camilla. To sum up, just to remind you, if you want to read more about International Women's Day and particular topics we've been discussing today, you can find Judy Cox's article on abortion and socialists online, and Judith Orr's 2 books on Marxism and women's liberation and abortion wars. And I'm hoping that Jake is going to post links to certainly to that article, and links to bookmarks where you can get those books. So I'm going to bring back the speakers in the same order, starting with Marta, just to sum up. Marta, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I haven't mentioned yet the international aspect of struggle for abortion, because it's also something that gives us power and our movement, that it is not only the struggle of local struggle. Yes, it is the international struggle, and there are many wonderful women we can draw inspiration from, and that's truly amazing. And yes, Kevin, Ireland and the example of their struggle for abortion was a much inspiration for us. We have also very similar stories when people judge women who had abortion when they don't know their histories, and their lives. And then in a cases, like, we also had like bishops' nieces who had abortions because they are privileged, you know. So this is this kind of mindset. Yes, and abortion also clearly shows how much women are affected by injustice, because all the economy is based on women's body, and that's something which is clearly visible on abortion law. Either it is the ban on abortion in cases when it is a torture, actually, like giving birth to the dead fetus, it is a torture for women, yes. And similarly, also like forcing women to have abortion, or like lack of circumstances to have a safe pregnancy. Like, it is also the kind of experience of refugees women. Yes, they also are like kind of victims, and also in the reproductionary way, yes, because they can't give birth in a humanitarian circumstances and suffer much because of everything. Because but it is not only the experience of having of being a woman, of like possibility to give birth. It's also the experience of experiences extreme sexism. And even in our struggle, this small percentage, because yes, it's true, the people who truly hate women, it's a small percentage, but they can destroy our lives so much. They can call us like, you know, all this slut shaming and things like that. And like, taking apart our, like, taking from us our sexuality, our like pleasure and experience of being women, because, and replacing it with guilt, with feeling of guilt, with feeling of being a object, not a person. And that's definitely the experience of being woman. And also it hits so much with trans people, etc. Like, they're so common in Poland that trans women in Poland like commit suicide because they cannot stand anymore all this hate and all this oppression that's happening. So yes, the experience of being woman is definitely something common, because it is connected to trying to regulate the economy with our bodies, and as a consequence, taking our sexuality and our personality. Yeah.
Thank you, Marta. Excellent. Camilla.
Yeah, thanks for that, Marta. Yeah, so I mean, a few comments, I guess. I mean, it's a funny thing, isn't it, that you see headlines that say drunk woman pilot. I mean, if that was a man, you wouldn't see drunk man pilot in a headline. Yeah, it's still quite rare that you hear people talk about men's football or the men's game, just sort of going back to the sport thing that Julie mentioned. So yeah, it still sort of shows what kind of society we live in, I guess. Yeah, so good points about hunter-gatherers and how the very different ways that people lived. The book to read on that is, of course, Friedrich Engels on the origin of the family, private property, and the state, where this is kind of where these ideas come from about how the family originated and the private property at the same time. You know, Engels was relying on anthropologists called Morgan, kind of 19th century anthropologist who looked at the Iroquois in North America and sort of New York State kind of area and studied them, and you know, sort of came to some conclusions about women's roles in those societies from that, which is, you know, not everything that they said in the 19th century. Yeah, some of it has been sort of disproved, but a lot of it is actually pretty, surprisingly accurate. And the broad kind of message is still true. I think it actually shows that, it's not that hunter-gatherer societies still survive, but that some kind of remnant of those kind of societies survived even until relatively recently in Southern Africa and South America and places. So yeah, they lasted a pretty long time, but it's not as simple as just them being a kind of more primitive form of society. These are societies that interacted with other types of societies around the world as well, and changed and developed throughout history. But some remnant of the way that people have lived in different ways still has existed until pretty recently, so which I think is quite interesting. So people have talked about how, actually, if we want to be really liberated, we have to fight the whole of class society. And I think Tim's right to talk about the kind of society that is a societal problem. The society that brings about women's oppression is also the same system that brings about all kinds of oppression, racism, homophobia, other types of Islamophobia, other types of oppression and division. It's a society that can put a rover on the surface of Mars, but can't, and can produce a vaccine to stop us getting COVID, but can't distribute that vaccine so that everyone, the majority of the world, still can't receive it and benefit from it. That's the kind of society that we're trying to do away with. That brings climate change and that brings war and huge inequality and financial crisis. And if we want to really change things, we need to confront that society and overthrow it and replace it with something better. And I think a lot of people with the whole COVID crisis are starting to realise that, realising that capitalism is the problem and that needs to be replaced. So I think we need a revolution. We need a revolutionary organisation. I think the reason why you know, Kevin knows how to respond when there's an attack on abortion rights and can start a petition and get people together to do that is, I think, you know, because Kevin's part of a revolutionary party. You know, Marta's activism is because, you know, she's part of a revolutionary party as well in Poland, our sister organisation. So I think we need actually many more people to get organised and be part of our organisations if we're going to actually kind of spread these ideas and change things. So just to sort of encourage anyone, if you're not part of the Socialist Workers' Party or equivalent organisation in your country, do think about joining, or do speak to the people here about joining the East Anglia branch of the party. And I'm sure the link can be put in the chat as well if people want to join.
Thank you very much.